Anyway, thank you, Clive, and thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Clyde Cruising Club. It's a long time since I visited last. What we're going to talk about this evening, there are two parts to the talk. The first part is when I set off by myself, but with various crews from time to time. And the second part is after I got to New Zealand and met the young lady who's sitting next to me. And the whole story pans out from there. In the picture that you're looking at now, you can see the boat as she finished. Well, that was about halfway around. That was coming down back into French Polynesia, second time around, having had all sorts of epics, which we'll talk about. And you also see that there we had a reasonable rig, and the boat was in very good sailing condition. I bought the boat secondhand. She was already 20 odd years old. She'd been built in Holland, very nicely built, from plywood and epoxy fiberglass over the outside. She was in Culatra, which is near Faro. And from Faro, I set off to Salvador de Bahia, but didn't quite make it because in a very heavy squall, I lost the rig.
Oh dear.
Nicole, and with the rig, of course, you don't realize how much gear there is fastened to the mast that you lose. Because, as you can see, it was quite rough. We'd been through a heavy squall, but squalls don't usually last very long. But if you catch it wrong, you can. If there's a weakness in the rig, then you can lose it, and that's what happened. And so we lost at that time the masthead. So that's your radio aerial, your lights, your radar, your deck light. All that went to the bottom. But I did manage, before letting the rig go completely, which was quite difficult, I did manage to slide the stainless steel sliders on the mainsail there, pull them back inboard, and I managed to rescue the mainsail. And this is what we looked like when we arrived in Brazil, in Fortaleza. We hadn't intended to go to Fortaleza, but that was the only spot on the map that we had. It was a chart, just the overall chart for the Atlantic. So we had no detailed charts at all. And we sailed into this place that I'd no idea what it was like. It actually looked, when it came into view very slowly, it looked just like Miami. And we were worried about, as we sailed in there with this jury rig, that I knew that it was shallow, the Brazilian coast was shallow. My worry was that we'd land over or come creaming in over a sandbank on the way into the coast. So I made a GPS waypoint and guessed that if Fortaleza was on the chart, there would be at least the remnants of a fishing port of some sort. So that's what we headed for. You'll notice on the jury rig that I made, it took me from about 10 o'clock in the morning till about 4 o'clock in the afternoon to get this all set up and sailing again. Unfortunately, I don't have any photos from outside. With I had the mainsail rigged horizontally, and I had a storm jib which I was able to rig almost normally. And you'll notice that the stub of them, very fortunate, the mast broke off as it hung over the gunwale. So the stub is still there. And I lashed the boom, which was a lot relatively, for this rig, relatively long boom, as a mast. And that's, you'll see that was the new rig. That's the rig that we built in Fortaleza. There was no yacht equipment there. So one of the fishermen took us up to a depot at the back of town, and we managed to suss a 6-meter piece of aluminium lamppost, which I'd measured and which fitted neatly into the stub. And that's Christina, who had sailed with me across the Atlantic. And there you see in detail the tubing fitting into the stub. And you'll see that because we no longer had, we're able to use the slides, I made these cable ties. Made these with cable ties, which ran very well once we got used to it, up and down the mast. And that's the masthead. Again, I couldn't rig everything inside because I didn't have sheaves, etc. So I had to work out a way of hanging all the rig and the sheaves, etc., from the masthead, and devise a way to stop them sliding down. And this is much later, the rig that we finally finished up with, which you will all think is rather small, and it is small even for a Warham catamaran. But I'd worked out by this time that the boat was very easily driven and didn't need a big rig, and we never wanted to go more than 4 to 5 knots anyway, because it gets noisy and uncomfortable. And so that was the rig that we finally designed and had a new set of sails made specially for the job.
And then John got to New Zealand, where I joined. I'm Swiss. I was on a year out and just wanted to travel to my dream places. Had been to Hawaii, then to New Zealand, and in New Zealand I learned to sail. I was a complete beginner. And there was one moment when I was sailing, I just thought, that's such a great feeling. And I thought instead of flying to Fiji, I could sail to Fiji. Didn't know anything at all, and asked around, what should I look for? And people just said around me, don't worry about the boat. Just go with somebody who is nice enough. You can imagine spending a few weeks with. So that's how I met John and the boat.
I would just like to point out, because you'll see this again, this beer crate, I'll talk about that later, but it actually went around the world and was never lashed on. That's where it lived. And that my windsurfer's on the starboard side forward and one solar panel here.
And I loved the boat. It just looked like a raft on the Lake of Zurich. You see there is just a hull, 2 hulls. That's where the accommodation is, and the middle just deck. So John had sailed with different crew to New Zealand, and then I planned originally just to sail with him up to Fiji, continued then to New Caledonia, got really hooked on, and continued afterwards through north of Australia, through the Malacca Straits, Malaysia, Thailand, across the Indian Ocean within a zigzag to South Africa, around Cape Good Hope, over to, this time we made it, to Salvador de Bahia, then up the coast, through the Panama Canal, second time for John, different route in the Pacific, back to French Polynesia, Tahiti, and all the way back to New Zealand. It was a great boat. It was very simple. And when people looked at it from the outside, they often said, what, you sailed around the world in this? But it had all the luxuries we thought you need, because it had space and people loved being on it. Very simple. Our fellow cruisers and locals the same.
And that's a picture from the masthead of just demonstrating how big the foredeck was. So we could always have the 2 decks on dinghy on deck and the windsurfer. And there's the beer crate again. And next to the beer crate, they are the fenders, which we had to protect from the sun. They just melted with the tropical heat.
And off we went. You'll
notice there's a radar reflector there. I had 2 radar. Having lost the radar, and we did not have AIS then, So having radar, a minimum of one radar reflector is important. And I discovered that both radar reflectors helped.
Sun protection was essential in the tropics. This is the best fabric we ever found anywhere. In Australia, lets the air through, it feels cool underneath, and you're protected from UV. We rigged it up whenever we could in harbour, and sometimes even when we were sailing with the jib or the spinnaker only.
That's the engine pod. So that's suspended below the beams, the beams that join the two hulls together. And this is a pod that's suspended underneath, which has now got a lovely engine. We actually started off with a wreck of a Renault engine, but this is a nice Yanmar that we only had 1 year's use, the last year's use of. And that's for those of you who are interested, that's how the propellers worked. It was all the time we were sailing, which is most of the time, the propeller was out of the water, so there was no drag, but it angled down sideways, down into the water. And so it was a brilliant, and it used a Suzuki car UV joint to connect the shaft to the engine.
The inside was very minimalist. 3 people could sit on a little wooden bench. Starboard was my side. I loved it. I had my side. We had it with his and hers. I had starboard, John had port, I had the galley, and John had navigation chart table. It was just standing room for me. Everything had to be very neat and tidy.
Ship shape.
Yeah. That's my bunk. Originally designed as double bunks by Warren, but I think it's a bit cramped if you're in there all the time, 2 people. But we made the most of it. And wherever we went, we took advantage here of the Caribbean colors you can buy in the shops of Neptune and Post Red.
And that's JJ's side. The captain's side, so I had all the technical gear, so my windsurfing gear. You'll notice the spare epoxy and plywood in case we did have damage on the way. Some of my tools. This is more awnings to go behind, because if you had a squall, it was always from behind, so it needed to keep the rain out of the hatches. And that's all of my clothing. We didn't have much. And that's just to look at the actual quality of the construction and how dry, and in the tropics, warm. The water temperature averages about 25 degrees C. So it was storage, but warm storage and dry.
Mm-hmm. It's quite incredible how much we were able to load. We always carried at least food for at least 1 month. Mostly like rice and all the things that lasted well for even longer, because we wanted to make sure if ever we are caught, we can survive.
And we did not have a fridge or a freezer. So it all had to be carefully chosen, the food. This is, again, back to my side, so you can see my clothing box there. And you'll see down here is the loo hidden away, and the usual equipment you would expect. But you wouldn't expect to see a picture of the Antrim coast. That's a family heirloom, the only family thing I managed to keep all the way around. And the comms gear.
We managed to download weather faxes. We did not have email or satellite telephone while crossing the oceans. So it was weather faxes. You had to read the maps, and we listened in to the forecasts which came on the SSB radio.
I was very happy not to have satellite communications, etc. I really enjoyed the peace of being away in the middle of the ocean and knowing I couldn't contact anybody, but nobody could contact me.
Yeah, and navigation was with charts. The computer here, we only used it when essential. really essential because it draws so much power that would have drained our batteries within seconds.
And so, and more stowage, we had tons and tons of spare warps, because when I bought the boat, when she was in the lagoon in Culatra, she was anchored with 4 anchors, and I kept all that on board. And that's the outboard motor stowage, which I bought new and I kept almost new by keeping it upright at all times. And that's the sail locker.
Mm-hmm.
And more tools and sail kit and dinghy kit.
And all these lockers are like accessible from the deck through these hatches, which we made as waterproof. They were virtually waterproof anyway, but with age, it started to leak a little bit.
So there you can see the other solar panel there, which spent most of its time there. But sometimes in harbour, if we were anchored into the prevailing wind, we were not getting sunlight on the solar panels. That was mobile. I could just move it anywhere on the deck to make sure that we got full solar power. Mm-hmm. That's our main anchor chain. And that's the kedge anchor. And that's the windlass.
John said before, the covers we made when going downwind. This is an example what we did with the cover, so we could sail downwind and no rain got inside. Instrument-wise, we had just the essential, the very basic. We had depth and speed, which was actually a little of a luxury. John had lost the top from the wind speed, so we didn't have wind speed. We had a little handheld you hold in the air, but that was never accurate. And the engine control panel was most of the time for show only, because John said we had a working engine 1 year, and for the rest of the time it was really a
half an engine.
Yeah, well, not even. I now know all the engine parts in English and French because we had to work all the time on it, and especially I know how to sail in and out places because it never quite worked when it should have.
As time went by, I discovered that there was a much better way of fastening the rig to the boat, better than stainless steel bottle screws. So I took all the bottle screws off and replaced it with modern lashings. That was our lovely little dinghy, which had been dredged up by the divers in Durban Harbour, and it was a broken, empty, but nice and light shell. So I added a skeg to it to make it a good dinghy for rowing, properly fended so we could bump into wherever we wanted to. And I also modified the side of the boat here so that we could heave, one person could heave the dinghy, it was so light, could heave it aboard single-handed.
Mm-hmm. And this gave me complete independence. It was sort of my dinghy, and I rode it around everywhere. When it was 2 people, like you couldn't sit in the middle anymore. You had to sit each end and row backwards. At night it fit, or at anchorage, it fit really nicely just at the back of the boat. We never had to put any anti-fouling on it. It stayed clean and nice.
That's a modification that I made so that I didn't want to have to be lifting the dinghy right out of the water, and but you have to keep it out of the water because stuff grows so quickly unless you're anti-foul on the bottom of the dinghy. So it was always hold out the water there. And when I was sailing single-handed, it allowed me to get on and off the boat in a very safe way, much the safest way.
We did have a big inflatable, which was very handy when we wanted to use the outboard or carry more people, or when it was rough or lots of shopping. So it was a bit use. Mine was the little one, and the other one when we needed it else.
And the big dinghy was our second propulsion system. Had the engine broken down in a really embarrassing place, I could lash that alongside, and it was powerful enough to push the boat along at normal hull speed.
Living was very much outdoors in the tropics. For us, it was the perfect boat because the cockpit allowed us to be in contact with the locals as well. They saw us all the time. There was no hiding on Toraipo. It was as soon as you got up, you were virtually outdoors. And this is a rare friend. I really call her a friend because when you get to these islands, the locals, they're really friendly, very nice, but it's very hard to make friends because they always know you're going again. There is no point really becoming too close or a friend, and she was one. So we spent a lot of time sharing recipes and a bit of our life. Really loved it.
Yeah, so this is a Polynesian, this is in Tonga actually. And this man is fishing, so he spends the whole day diving down to about 5-8 meters, collecting
sea cucumbers.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, and so he would collect them, put them in the tire there, but we invited him aboard for a coffee.
Well, he didn't want a coffee, he wanted milk. So warm milk. So we made him some. We had milk powder. John said we didn't have a fridge, so we had milk powder. Every so often you found cream powder. Yep. So
which is incredible that the whole population has become adopted by its relationship of the islands to America. That they've adopted by having milk and having warm milk. But there's no possibility of having cows or whatever on their islands.
And then you saw the bookshelf in my bunk before. Reading was very important to me. And but there's very rarely you can buy books. So you swap books. I organized book swaps on Toraipo every so often and went around to other boats. And that was always a great moment to meet new people, to meet some people you had met before, and not only to swap books, but as well all sort of boat gear that wasn't needed anymore.
Spare bottle screws.
Yeah, I don't think anybody took them. And then you share your life with your fellow cruisers. And here, jam making. I kept every jar I used. I made jam here. I used it as the jars as well for pickling fish when we caught fish.
And that's one of the nice new sales which we eventually were able to buy. I bought that one. I actually had bought it in Hong Kong and had it flown to us. And it's great to have a proper reaching sail because we spent most of our time going downwind, which is what happens if you sail around the world. You spend most of the time and stay near the equator, you spend most of the time going downwind.
Night watch. Well, we had a really nice setup because on my first trip from New Zealand to Fiji, we did it like one does, 3 hours on, 3 off. And I got so exhausted. I mean, I just cried. So we said, well, we have to change something. And I realized I wake up naturally from at midnight. So from then onwards, John, hero, he does the night watch virtually till midnight. I do it then from midnight till 2 o'clock and before sunrise.
She had difficulty in staying awake even till 2 o'clock. So you'll notice she has 2 watches here. One's a watch and the other is?
Yeah, I didn't really get seasick badly, but the start was always a bit uncomfortable. So it didn't work though, that watch. And I quite enjoyed night watch because I was the one who did the fishing. And here I left this lure out and I caught a really big squid. I only know of one other boat who caught the squid this size. Mind you, I left the lure out 2 nights, and after catching one of these every night, I stopped fishing at night in that area because I always thought what we catch, we have to eat, and I really didn't want to eat any more squid.
And squid are monsters to take apart. You have to turn them inside out and take the innards out.
Yeah.
You don't want too much aboard.
No.
And that's us heading north and crossing the equator. So we're heading up towards the Marshall Islands, having left Samoa. And I'd really wanted to cross on 180, but we didn't quite make it because the wind and the tide, it tends to push you sideways on that route. You'll see we're going at 4.9 knots, and that was in 12th of September 2010.
Mm-hmm. And that's our normal setup with the GPS and paper chart. And when there was no wind, flat, calm, we were able to swim in the ocean. So we just dropped the boarding ladder and went in. And it's quite magic. It's quite scary as well.
It's very scary. You really think, when we first started doing it, you really think twice about hopping over the side in the middle of the Pacific. But we slowly got used to it, and I would go a little bit further than Nicole ever would. And we always had a floating line towing behind just in case, because the boat was never stationary. It was always drifting along, and just drifting was faster than either of us could swim most of the time.
Yeah, John always had the dream to go windsurfing in the wide ocean, but I didn't let him do it.
She wouldn't let me go.
No. Most of the time we had the autopilot. Mike, ours was called. He was doing the work. And there you see the other radar reflector, one on the mast, one back here.
And a fender.
Steering position, again, you know, we always covered from the sun, and you wore a hat, covered your shoulders, or I did, yes, anyway.
And the solar panel, of course, again. We were really dependent on the solar panels and the wind generator. And that's me steering, and obviously the only time we steered by hand or by, that's the tiller extension, was when we were going in and out of an atoll, when you could only steer by eye. You had to go through a narrow channel through the coral, and you had to get it right.
Provisioning was a big part of the cruising life because you really wanted to be independent. And this is a little shop in French Polynesia where we found the basics. Fruit and vegetable were often given to us. When we went to places, to villages, people were very generous and told us just help yourself, or they even helped us.
Brilliant. We always had more fruit than we can eat. They were so generous.
Mm-hmm. Then the little stalls of the Caribbean. And the big markets, especially in the Pacific, with an abundance of fruit. And what I loved, like here, these taro roots, they are in hand-woven baskets. So you could buy them like that, just about per basket. It was lovely. Really enjoyed that. I did the cooking on the boat. So I always...
Well, apart from the first meal.
That's right.
Once.
And so I always liked to know what people cook there. So this was some sort of sweet with the local flour they had, and sugar and oil wrapped in a leaf. So had to buy that one. And as we didn't have a fridge, we stored vegetables partly outside.
But in the shade.
Yes, but in the shade. There was a lid on them afterwards. The lid is just to the left, just here next to the seat. Oh, yeah. That would be the lid. The ice box was hardly used because ice, well, doesn't last very long, and it's a lot to carry home. When we left the place, it looked like this, a big variety of fruit and vegetables, and you had to eat a lot quite fast without the fridge. It was mostly cabbage, onions, potatoes, with tomatoes, lemons, that lasted really well. All the rest was a few days and it had to be eaten. But I didn't mind. I thought as long as we had something fresh, I was very happy. Sometimes there were things on the market I didn't buy. And that's one of the examples, but intriguing, what they put in these.
We've no idea what it was,
yeah,
or what it would taste like, or how you would cook it.
Learned how to open a coconut.
We tried previously opening a coconut with a hacksaw, which just doesn't work. You can't do it.
Well, that's just to take the sort of shell off it, so you have the nut itself, which is the hardest part of it. Once you have that, you can just have it open. In lots of places, they have like 50 different words for all the different stages of the coconut. So if ever you open a coconut and it looks like this, you have to try it. It's sweet. The children eat it virtually a bit like we would eat marshmallows. Local graters make the grating of the coconut very fast. You sit on it and you just grate away like that. To add water afterwards, squeeze it, and you have coconut milk. I first took coconut milk, and coconut water was the same for me, so learned that lesson quite fast, that the water is just, once there is good water, there is not enough white flesh to make the coconut milk actually. And I could never resist bananas. You see, like, I think wherever you are, you have to take what is special from there. And I mean, having grown up in Switzerland, I never ever saw a whole bunch of bananas. And in the markets, they just sold them. So I always came home with one like that. Sometimes I couldn't even carry them. And
well, it was very difficult to lift it out of the dinghy. And then we discovered that they all ripened on the same day.
Yes, so it's banana bread and banana fritters and lots of bananas just like that. And you make a lot of friends with giving them away.
That was one of my preoccupations. In order to keep awake most of the night, I needed something to nibble. So whenever we could buy a sliced loaf, I would dry it. I would just take a day, dry one side and then the other, which effectively toasted it. And then I would have toast and very often tin cheddar cheese, which I could nibble away at and drink coffee through the night.
Mm-hmm. The bread like this lasted a month, 2 months, no problem. And we did carry three gas bottles, 3 small ones, the normal, what are they
camping
called?
gas.
The camping gas size. Yeah. But to bake bread, that was a luxury, because for what you get out of it, you use a lot of gas. So it was always the balancing out, what do you make and for how much gas. And that's what we all dream of, isn't it?
Yeah, whenever it was possible, we'd get the bedding out to dry it.
And there was time to eat the bananas and cut your hair. I was the fisherwoman on board. I often have a laugh. Eh? John went sailing and I went fishing. So that's the setup I had. That's in the back cockpit, sort of. There was bicycle inner tube as a shock absorber, the only elastic I found that lasted in the tropics. Then very simple squid mantles as lures, and we caught, depending where we were, really good fish. We always, well, not always, we often caught the fish, but we could never count on it. And so we could just land the fish back there. It was all hand lines and gloves. And this is a mahi-mahi I caught, just about the biggest size I could land. All the others would have gotten away because they were just too strong, too big. And then it was up to doing the work. At the beginning, I couldn't kill the fish. I was always able to fillet it. But at the beginning, John had to come and kill it, actually.
Which is a bit of a giggle, because the fish would be leaping about in the these aft, we had 2 aft cockpits, you've noticed,
Mm.
and they'd just be leaping there, and I would have to go in and
No, and
do
you
the
weren't
job.
good at it anyway. So at the end, I was really good, very fast, and I think it was just part of our life. So we had, whenever we caught the fish, it was 3 meals, whether it was lunch, dinner, breakfast, in which order ever. And the rest, in good conditions, I pickled, fried, and with vinegar, or I put in the pressure cooker in jars and sterilized it like that.
This was, we'd left the Galapagos, and this boat, we didn't see very many ships at all in the Pacific. Anyway, this one was right on our track.
Mm-hmm.
So Nicole called them up.
Well, John told me call him, so I called him. And the captain on that boat, he said, habla español. And my Spanish is very basic.
So I said, sí.
So I said, sí. And so tried to make a little bit of a joke, sort of. I was trolling. I had a line out, and I wanted to say, don't catch all the fish. I'm fishing too. But I think what I virtually said was, don't take all the fish, I want one. So anyway, this captain, after my sentence, he said, non es un problema. And well,
manda la botta.
Then manda la botta, something like that. So we wondered, what's he going to do? So what he did at the end. And then it was a big waiting. We waited for like 10 minutes. And then he, all on channel 16, he said, hola velero. If we're ready. And we said, yes. We didn't know what we should be ready for. So he lowered this yellow aluminium thingy. Whisked over to us. We didn't even have fenders out, and dropped the plastic bag on board. And I thought, oh, that's really nice. A plastic bag. They must just have filleted some fish. And so I said, thank you. Then they turned back and gave us this fish.
Wahoo.
That's a wahoo. That's one of the fish I never caught. It needs quite a bit more technique, I think. And but that's the best fish I think you can eat. Mm. Anyway, he turned back, or these 2 guys turned back and wanted to give us another fish. And I said, no, thank you. We just, we don't have a fridge. We can't handle this. And thank you so much. And then anyway, and then he went away, and I looked what was in the plastic bag, and the captain had put a tourist guide from Manta in it with his email address. So that was really nice. And when we got to the next islands, which were the Gambier in French Polynesia, I emailed him, and we had a really nice exchange where we were, what sort of fish we caught, and a lovely, lovely encounter out in the nowhere. Anyway, but before he had given us this fish, I had caught a tuna, which we didn't catch very much. And this fish doesn't look that big, but there is an enormous amount of meat on it. So we ate a lot of fish. There you see tomatoes, onions. There's no onion on this one, but lemon. Mm-hmm. That's a normal meal at sea for us. A lot of fish. And then I had to find a way what to do with it all, because I didn't want to throw it over the sides. I didn't have any more jars, and I tried drying, but I realized unless you really salt it properly and then dry it for a long time, ours just got
it never dried. It never dried very well.
We couldn't use it, so we had to put it over the side at the end.
Madame at sea, this is Nicole's favorite downwind mode. You see we've got 2 jibs up. We've used the second jib, it's just flying. And we have a glass of water, a book to read. We're doing about 4 knots, and the wind's behind us. Perfection. We could have gone on for days and weeks like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if it weren't for the odd squall that would come through. We're in Panama, in Colón. So that's the Caribbean end of the Panama. And these are this is the pilot boat who's just approached us. bow on, and these are the two pilots. They're going to be with us because we were very fortunate. We had no engine by that time. The guy on the left was to be our pilot, which is compulsory. And the guy on the right was to be the pilot on a French catamaran that had volunteered to tow us through, which is very unusual. They really didn't want us to do that. So this was us. You can see it's quite windy at the end of the day, wind blowing us into the first lock on the canal. We have on board extra crew, volunteers from other yachts, because you have to have 4 line handlers and a helmsman. You can see the wee helmsman in the middle there. And incidentally, you can see the wind generator, which I'd mentioned earlier. And as well as all of that, we made, as all the yachts do going through the canal, we made extra fenders from car tires, which you had to go to the dump and get the car tires and then cover them with plastic bags, bin bags.
And that's what it looked like. We left, we went through the locks in the evening and then stayed overnight in Lake Gatun. And the next morning, we got the tow all the way across the lake. Went into the last locks, eh?
Which is unusual. This is unusual because we're only 3 yachts. Normally you would have a big ship in there like that.
And it is a very magic moment,
yeah,
when you make it into the Pacific.
Final moment and into tidal waters. It's so different. And it was so nice to get back in tidal waters.
The next stop, Galapagos, with its animals. You always, he woke us up every morning. I had to wait for a long time to see my first whale. And it was in Galapagos when this one came close to us.
You can see the Galapagos in the distant background there. We're on our way. And we just thought that he was going to just pass by.
But he didn't. He dived. And then he went under the boat, which was the moment we both thought, "Ooh, this is getting a bit close, a bit too close for comfort." The bubbles, you could see them all underneath the deck.
We were totally gripped for 25 minutes because there were in fact 2 of them. Mm-hmm. And they really wanted to have a good inspection of our hulls and rudders, but they didn't touch. No. Thank goodness.
I loved ocean crossing. For me, that was the best part of sailing. The being at sea at all weather, and just John and me and a good team, knowing what we're doing just doing what needs to be done.
That's what I went for, the wide blue yonder. Mm-hmm. I didn't really go for this, but things grow in the tropics. So I didn't have a high enough waterline, some would say, with the anti-fouling. So halfway across, it all starts to grow. And I had previous experience of stuff growing below the waterline as well. So I set to and attacked anything that looked like it might grow. And that's the sort of thing you had to devise as you go along on these boats.
Yeah.
There we are downwind with that lovely asymmetric, which we could fly from. You don't need a pole. You can fly from either bow, and if we ever jibe, which we avoided, then we would just move the whole thing to the other bow, from right to left, if you like, in this picture. And here we're in Tahiti. And at least every 2 years, if you're in the tropics, you would have to haul out. And as there were virtually no tides, you had to pay for it, which I never liked doing, but hey. So in this place, we've been told that they were used to catamarans, which are quite tricky to haul out. So they prepared the haul out equipment. ready for our arrival. And these are the men getting it all ready. And then, because the water's warm, they didn't hesitate to get in there and line us up correctly so that the boat was not twisted by being unevenly settling onto the chocks. And then as they pulled her out, we could actually hear it, the hulls twisting, the little bit that they did. And here we are being chocked.
Mm-hmm. It was usually my part to sand and paint, while John did all the technical parts where you had to think.
Oh, that's very kind.
Yeah, well, that's how it was.
And chasing around doing deals for
Yeah,
paint
so
and
that's
so on.
my work. Even John is standing there.
But that's me taking credit for it.
Yes.
But we're very pleased. In 4 days, we managed to bring the boat back to new, ready for another 2 years cruising.
Fortunately, she was just the size that fitted in a normal travel lift, which made it much easier, depending where we were.
So that's 2 years later. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Water, we didn't have a water maker. I'm quite glad we didn't have one. We met a lot of people who the water maker always broke down, or was one of the equipments that broke down most often. And nearly everybody we knew carried as much water as us, which was like 200-300 liters. We collected rainwater mainly in just pieces of string and put the bucket where it falls. Had jerry cans to put it in, which was brilliant because we were able to clean them properly. These are 20 liters which were stored on deck, and another 100 liters were stored inside in 10-liter jerry cans.
The problem with rainwater is it goes off very, very quickly in the tropics. It begins to go, after 2 weeks, it begins to go green at the bottom of the jerry can. So we were always very careful to totally clean them before we took in some more rain squall water.
And then laundry day. There are a lot of places there isn't a laundrette. Plus, I didn't have to carry things in and out.
So if we'd had a really good squall or two, then we would have enough water to do the washing and even to have a bath on a really good day.
Mm-hmm. But mostly we carried water in the dinghy back to the boat. And
that was Twilight who gave us free water because they were making too much water with their water makers.
Exactly. Then there was a lot of maintenance to be done, just always on the go. Here we are in Tahiti. That's actually where we met Will and Margaret Rudd.
True.
In this anchorage, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And with view on Moorea. And I'll show you a few photos, which is the same view, different times of the day.
It's an anchorage we'd chosen because I had to convalesce, having had an operation for a hernia operation in the hospital there. And so I wasn't allowed to do any heavy work. So we found this lovely, lovely anchorage.
Mm-hmm. Work on the engine everywhere we had to do that.
This is the old engine that only worked half the time or less. And we'd met, the engine was getting, in this, where we were here, the engine was getting so bad, the whole anchorage knew that we couldn't start it. It would puff, puff, puff and blow out diesel smoke because one cylinder was not giving at all. So one of the other yachts came by, one of the skippers of one of the other yachts came by and said, you've got problems with your engine. I know about diesels. He'd actually been in charge of all the power systems on a US submarine. So he said, what you need, John, is 24 volts. We had a 12 volt starter, 24 volts, and that will start her up okay. And he explained how to do it. and this is Nicole, but we had to separate during the starting procedure, we had to separate the two systems so that we had 24 volts to start, but then we could go back to 12 volts and not to have blown all the electronics.
Mm-hmm. The sails, we repaired them, if possible, I still stitched them, but it came to a moment we couldn't stitch them anymore because it made holes. So
then I then discovered that contact glue works incredibly well, and it lasts a long time.
So we had a lot of time to have just fun.
Yeah, and some of you know I'm always a very keen windsurfer. So and I thought I'd managed to do a lot more windsurfing than I did. But of course, when you're in a sheltered anchorage, it's not always the ideal place for windsurfing. You'll notice on the left here of the island, the evidence of what's happening with the climate. These people eventually are getting washed out of their homes, and they move a little bit further up and further up the island, but eventually they will no longer be able to live there.
When John was reconvalescent in Tahiti, I went with a cruising friend paragliding over Tahiti. So that's our anchorage, with a view you had before of Moorea and the inland. You always shared your life with your cruising friends, and you made great friends, sometimes for life, even though you didn't meet for very long. So playing volleyball in between the palm trees. I showed often other families' children how to fish, or invited them because it was so easy to stand. There was a lot of space, and she just caught dinner for her family. Went fishing with the locals.
And this local's name was Taffy, because on the island there are different areas, and one is a Scottish area where they're all, and then there's an Irish area and there's a Welsh area. So this man was Taffy. He wasn't a Paddy.
But most time on the beaches I spent looking for shells. That's how I made some money to pay for my trip, apart from cleaning other boats and sewing. So here am I at work looking for shells.
Professional beachcomber.
Mm-hmm. I didn't dive very often for shells, and I never took any animal that was alive to make something out of it. This is a pencil urchin. And then I had lots of shells, which I stored. Had a Honda generator and a Dremel to drill holes. And made jewelry, which I used for swapping and for gifts and for selling. Gift for a friend for her birthday, with black pearls from Tahiti. And I showed other people how to do it, how to tie the knots, so they could do it themselves.
Here we are on a rough day, going downwind again, and of course the beer box, the beer bottle box, is still there. It actually did 30,000 miles, more than 30,000 miles, just sitting there, not being lashed on. It gives you an idea of the way the boat floats and lifts to the waves.
When we were on the way from Madagascar to South Africa, just before the hurricane season started, we had a crash.
Yeah, a nasty one. With a local boat in the middle of the night, 1 o'clock in the morning. was a hell of a crash. He had no lights. We had no lights. And I only sensed him right at the last minute. So it'd be probably a bit bigger than this one. We don't know whether anybody was injured on board because the guys would be sitting out, hanging out.
Mm-hmm. So they just continued, and I was thrown around in my bunk, and we had quite a lot of damage. We went back to Madagascar, and fortunately we remember the beach we had seen, so we beached.
We did a lot of damage. As you can see, the impact must have been pretty horrendous. Mm-hmm. And it was all absorbed all the way through the hull. That was the pulpit, obviously, all wrecked and bent. And
then we could have done it ourselves, but we were a bit in time pressure because we really wanted to get away from Madagascar because of the hurricane season. And we were very lucky that there was a place with apprentice there. So he's the teacher who just shows the apprentice how to measure and repair.
We were also under immigration did not want to see us back, so they were really annoyed. Mm-hmm. And it was the same officials, and they were particularly annoyed because I refused previously to give them any sort of backsheesh, so we had to make it quickly.
Mm-hmm. And they came with their traditional tools,
and they had timber as well, which we'd have found difficult to source.
The children moved on our boat and under our boat. It was a great news for them that we were on the beach. At one stage I said, if you come at 6 o'clock, please just be a bit quiet.
6 a.m.
6 a.m. in the morning, yeah.
Yeah, just go back. Yeah, you'll see under the bench there, the blue tanks, they're full of ethylene, which we use to fuel our alcohol stove for quite a long way around.
For cooking. On the beach, they had just repaired the sail, so that's virtually a new sail for them, which makes you feel quite humble for our sails when we think, well, what do we think is an old sail?
And the man on the left is carrying their anchor, which they guard carefully by their own sheds, because they're all quite handy at taking stuff off each other, apparently.
Mm-hmm. All lashed and nice, ready to set off.
Very, very, very poor in a lot of the countries that we visited. These guys obviously short on clothing, but no paint at all on the boat, which for me is quite surprising. And we didn't buy the lobster, it was just too big for us.
Then when we were back in New Zealand, it was time to think about what do we want to do next. So we decided to go up to the Marshall Islands. People told us there are locals who still do everything under sail, and we thought that would be a nice place to go. And it's supposed to be quite safe, not 100%, in hurricane season. On the way up from New Zealand, we had a really bad storm again. It takes you can be, virtually every time you go up from New Zealand, you get into something and you take the best weather window possible.
Yeah, there are depressions that chase across, and they're almost weekly. So here we caught one, and it smashed in the port bow, totally smashed all the plywood away. But we didn't actually take any water in at all, as I remember.
No, but it was sort of these were the moments I really didn't like, and. It was always good to arrive afterwards in a really safe anchorage and buying all we need and repair.
And we had absolutely no time pressure here. And in Tonga, they are sailors, so they have proper marine ply, decent timber, and we were able to make a proper job of rebuilding the front end of the boat.
And we made it to the Marshall Islands, which is really a lovely place where the people do still sail.
These are fabulous proas, which never cease to amaze me. Very light, very fast. All the equipment's very light, but they were good load carriers as well.
Mhm.
So they would go out every day to bring back coconuts and other things from other islands, and then come back to their own island each night.
Places for apprentice to build them. So that's why they're so nicely painted with such nice sails.
And these are the model yachts that the kids make themselves from breadfruit. This one had actually sailed about a mile, and I just picked it up out of the water. But I was amazed at the sophistication, because they could actually control the main sheet to set the boat up just right, which is why they win races. And just fantastic construction.
Mm-hmm. And when you see this, you can imagine why we think we just had the perfect boat to do then what we were doing, because people really, it was not a big step for them, because we were on a catamaran which looked more or less like the boats they had. I mean, the Warrams are Polynesian catamarans. We invited often people on board. They tied theirs at the back, and we had a chat.
Yeah, that's a look of relief, having just sailed through a very narrow, a narrow exit there. It was actually exiting. And you'll see the color where there's no depth. And this is the color that you're looking for depth. But you really had to eyeball it. So very careful steering. Nicole, nevertheless, looking at the GPS and trying to keep us in deep water. And you prayed that no clouds had come across, because if a cloud came across, then you couldn't see the difference in color.
I tried to live or be like, how to say, like the locals are. So I wore dresses when women wore dresses, and covered my shoulders, my knees. Here I had to wear long trousers under my dress as well. When I got ashore, I was never alone, because you don't walk around there alone. And they were very surprised that John didn't come, but well, that's how we were. I liked to go to the beaches, and John enjoyed being on the boat.
And the local women are not allowed to walk around alone. They're always accompanied, always chaperoned, either by a man or by the kids.
Mm-hmm. And I had great fun with them. We played together, and they showed me the beaches. And some of them came on board. Interestingly, it was only boys that swam out to us.
Yeah.
No girls. Then this family, I had given them a fish the day before. And when we got by, they gave us some fritters, some breadfruit fritters. That's their kitchen, all outdoors with a nice roof, cooking on open fire. Here the same.
Another family, another kitchen.
Yeah. I made anklets and bracelets and earrings for virtually the whole village, and in exchange always got drinking coconuts, which made them laugh, because they thought, how can she drink so many coconuts? But for them it was great, because there was no shop they could buy anything on these little islands. And you didn't get easily anywhere at all. I mean, some families didn't have enough money, not even $100, to send their children to high school later. And I enjoyed it very much. And coconuts, they always belonged to somebody, so I could never just pick them anyway. It would be like stealing. And then they thought, let's have a party on your boat. And they came, the women, and it was just great. They all carried the food, each woman something different. I made cakes, and we had a lot of laughing, not dancing, but moving around, and music. No alcohol on these islands.
And normally no men. I got special permission to be there and take the photos.
So you see the creamer, coffee, and sugar. That's what you really needed, and coffee when you had a party. Then at the end, they shared out everything. They ate very little and carried all the food back to their families.
Here we are waiting. They are waiting for the fortnightly ferry, which didn't always come, and they didn't know exactly when it would come. And came the day when I felt we were beating one night and the wind shifted a bit and we couldn't make our destination. Rough night. And I decided after 9 years, I really fancied doing something different. So we worked our way back down to Margero, and we sold the boat and left with just a backpack each. And first stop, we had to buy some shoes in Guam. I'd like to, and we would like to, thank you all for listening to us, listening to our story. And of course, we'd be very happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I can see lots of people clapping.
Oh, nice.
So
Thank you.
you can at least see it.
Yeah.
So any questions for anybody? Please just unmute your microphone and go ahead.
I saw the question in the chat about the rain and water. I did whether we worried about water if it didn't rain. I mean, I was worried about water. So I always, as soon as it rained, I let the water run off the sails and then I went and collected it. We were very careful with the water. The longest trip from South Africa to Brazil took us 6 weeks. We carried 300 liters of water and I was very careful how I cooked. Really, spaghetti and everything was 1/3 salt water, 2/3 fresh water, and use only so much water that that the pasta was virtually cooked, but there was no water left. So it was no boiling in plenty of water. We used fresh water to clean our teeth. I really didn't want to do it with salt water, and to rinse the cutlery at the end. So on average, it was like 4 liters a day together. That's what we used. And as I said, we never had a problem with water.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, even after the longest trip, we still had...
We arrived with like 30 liters.
30 liters, so...
Yeah.
I didn't worry because I knew Nicole would be worrying. Next.
Can I ask how you managed to avoid hurricanes? Did you take any strategies of going to New Zealand or anywhere else?
Sorry, I couldn't understand the question.
I was just wondering how you avoided the hurricanes or cyclones. Did you go to New Zealand or did you go north? Or what did you do?
Yeah, that's what we did. We went to I went to New Zealand twice to get out of the hurricane zone. And the third time when we were in the Marshall Islands, we knew there was a possibility, and the wind did actually go round, swap directions, which is lethal when you're in a more or less permanent anchorage. But it didn't blow it almost blew too hard for us, but it didn't. And then it switched back again.
Yes. Yes. And we did when we were in the Caribbean, we went just to Trinidad, which is outside the hurricane season. We never tempted fate by staying too long somewhere.
Yeah. But we always had a plan for whichever anchorage you're in. Ideally, if you're in an atoll, we tried to have a plan that would allow us to go to the other side of the other end of the atoll, or the other side of the atoll in the night, avoiding the bommies, which was the tricky bit. So we would plot out waypoints within and hope that we could do it, but we never actually had to do it. I don't remember, did we? In the dark, no.
Did you have some form of GPS?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we had a really good Furuno GPS and totally depended on it. loved it. I wouldn't go anywhere without.
And a little handheld spare one, which we kept in a biscuit tin. We didn't have an oven. You know, some people put it in the oven to make sure if lightning strikes, it doesn't blow up.
And I was fairly comfortable with that the second GPS would save us. But even if it didn't, we always plotted once every 12 hours. So we knew where we were. And I would have just dead reckoned my way into wherever we were going to.
I've got a question about you showed having an HF SSB radio there. It looked like a receiver to me because the coax was a bit light. So was it mostly weather faxes you used that for?
Yes, and in the Pacific there was the Rag of the Air. That's really, I don't know if it still exists, but that was just a forum where one man always talked about weather. He actually talked you through it. We were just not always able to listen to it. And so we were the listeners in these.
On the shortwave.
Yes. Yeah. We actually chose not to transmit. And I must say, I really enjoyed the freedom not to have email, not to have a satellite phone, because when I set off traveling originally, I never thought I would be away for so long. And when I went, I closed my notebook, I switched off my phone and I went. And for the first 4 years, I refused to have a computer on board. I said, we don't need that. And then after 4 years, we thought, maybe we could, you know, or not quite 4 years, or because it really was handy for the faxes. But I would never want to email while sailing.
Yeah, I did try at one stage to install a shortwave transmitter, but discovered it's quite a cumbersome bit of kit and it's very heavy.
Yes,
and it uses
a lot of electricity.
Well. So I had an option of buying one secondhand, but I opted out at the last minute.
Did you ever run out of electricity on your voyage for your GPS and your?
Did we run out?
Not when I was there.
No, we didn't, because with the solar panels and the wind generator, and we were careful. We knew exactly what was using the power, but because we didn't have a transmitter and we didn't have a fridge, the plotter, even when we had the laptop, that's the one that uses the most. So we would just switch it on and just do a plot and then switch it off again. And then we'd switch it on last minute if we really needed it for an entrance, or we knew we had plenty of power in the batteries.
Yeah, but it was very, I really learned, as you know, like I was a complete beginner, so I really learned to sail with using very little electricity. Even now with our new boat, I always switch the fridge off because I think it doesn't need it. And we, at the beginning, I wasn't allowed to read at night because that would have used too much power. So I got a head torch then, but we needed the spare batteries. So it was always very, very careful with the resources we had.
How much did you use your engine?
Oh, I honestly, I think when I got on the boat, it started, and then we could maybe use it for charging half an hour a day, but it got less and less. And at the end, it really didn't work at all because it was always black smoke and you name it. And so it was, I think we, of all the time, like 95%, we just sailed, or 98%. It was we never relied on the engine. We always, and we anchored most of the time, so it was always anchoring in a place we knew we could sail out of.
Yeah.
And for that reason, sometimes we didn't go to places where other people went to who had a reliable engine.
Yeah, I was always had a strategy. I love sailing in and out of places, especially if there are lots of other people watching. And just, it's such great fun, and it's still great fun to me. So it wasn't a problem for me to do that. And as Nicole said, we got to sail, got to be in places where other people didn't want to be, but it was just perfect for us to be able to sail out of if we had to do that in the night, for example.
But how about these gaps in the coral reefs? They must have been tricky at times too, or were they very large, perhaps.
Yeah, no, it's very tricky, and you can only do it by the color of the water. Obviously, on the charts, that all the reefs, all the coral reefs, all the bommies anyway within the atolls are not on charts, so you have to do that by eye. And the gaps, because the charts and the GPS are not on the same wavelength, we would have from other cruisers ideas. They would say where there was a gap through the reef, which we could sail through, but we would actually go, usually with the wind behind us, go downwind looking for the blue gap, and then hop across through the channel into the atoll.
Yeah.
And
So
often with cross tides.
and not something to be done at night.
No, you couldn't.
No,
No
I
way.
mean, we had, once we arrived in an atoll, it was bad weather, and it was like 4 a.m, so we just had to wait till the sun was in the sky to go in. So you reach back and forwards, and until there is time to go in.
There were several occasions when I did that. I just put two waypoints on my paper chart, and we just reached backwards and forwards for half the night or all night if necessary. So we just reached backwards and forwards, which was easy to set the boat up to reach and with just one of us keeping an eye on things and tacking obviously at the end of each run.
What kind of steering? I mean, obviously you weren't steering all the time. What particular type of steering were you using? Self-steering?
Yeah, it was an ST4000, an auto helm.
The basic auto helm, but it steered most of the time. Well, I had two spare arms, obviously, because it wears out. It's got a tiny little motor in it. But all the steering was done by the autopilot. The one thing about a our catamaran, it wasn't like sailing a soling, which is what I used to sail at all. I mean, it's like driving a truck, it was all grunt. So there was no pleasure from steering. So I was very happy for the auto helm to do all of it. And that used a bit of power, but because the warrants are so light, the boat was so light, it was only fully loaded. It was only about 3 3/4 tons, and very easily driven, and very small rudders. You may have noticed when she was hauled out of the water there. So the auto helm had very little work to do there, provided you set the rig up appropriately.
Just wondering, did you ever have any real trouble with logistics or visas or the regulators getting in and out of the various countries?
Well, we never had real problems. We always got in and we always got out, but you have the odd occasion when somebody forgets you to stamp your passport in, so they can't stamp it out. And that's a lot of bureaucracy afterwards, or you have to go through a whole procedure in Bali, we had to do that, to go first to the military, then to customs, then to like 5 different places.
Yeah.
And in some countries it was really, they expected you, it was mainly Madagascar, I found. They really wanted a bribe, even though there was a big poster behind the official, actually.
Saying no bribes.
No bribes here. But
Africa.
and we didn't pay one at the end, but we didn't get the 3 months everybody else got. We just got 2 weeks when we came back. When we had to do the repairs. Yeah. And we would have easily gotten more had we paid something, we're sure.
I'm always very relaxed in those situations, because for me, it's part of the trip. You're going to have something different and interesting. You're going to have lots of rubber stamps or no rubber stamps in French Polynesia, very easygoing. And it's all part of the fun. But the Bali bit, I mean, it took us 2 days, but we saw all sorts of interesting, different facets of their lives and interacted with them and learned from them.
And as well, we had to realize when we arrived somewhere, it always told ourselves, it will take a day to check in. Don't do anything else. True. It's just 1 day. Don't try to do anything. And then we were okay. Sometimes
we didn't rush ashore. Some places we'd just stay on the boat for the first day and then go ashore and sign in and check in and do what you have to do. Because we were so comfortable and happy just being
John,
on
you
there.
There's a question in there on the chat saying, can you go over again the
What caused the
dismasting?
dismasting, John?
Ah, right.
What caused that?
I wish I knew. It was, I guess it was, the weak point was there was no inner forestay, and it broke at that sort of level. So I guess, and it was old by then. I mean, the rig was over 20 years old, but I'd redone everything and checked everything. So it was either an old weakness in the tube, or it was a stainless fitting again. But I don't know, because the whole lot's about the bottom of the Atlantic. Long way down. So, because I just had to let it all go. I would like to have known, but hey.
One other question, you were talking about, obviously, the fascinating how you managed to eke out all your food, etc., and live in, without a fridge. But did you manage without alcohol?
Well, we bought wine in boxes. But it wasn't loads we carried. And in one place, actually, well, to answer the question, no, we always had alcohol on board. Yeah. And we even learned how to make rice wine when we were really away for a long time. So John always needed a glass of red wine, and I always needed some coffee. So we were well stocked with both.
Yeah, I mean, we always managed to eke out the gin bottle.
Never had gin on board.
And I got used to drinking warm gin and mostly rum actually, but drinking warm rum and Coke, I just got used to that because that's all we had.
Yeah.
John, you touched on in your book that you came across some unsavory characters. Was it off Venezuela?
In the book that we picked somebody up, that's what you referred to.
Oh yeah.
So yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, that was
yes.
What? We left. Yeah, we picked a man up from Trinidad when we left Trinidad. Was that the story?
I think it was, yes.
Yeah. Okay. What happened there was we'd left Trinidad, we were sailing out, and I'd said there's always wind in the Caribbean. And we got out there for the first time ever. There was no wind, and the current took us sideways all through the night. Nicole was desperate to go to the Grenadines because we had a Christmas party arranged there, and we were going the wrong way. And about 10 o'clock in the morning, flat, oily, calm, really hot. And I could see this thing in the distance, binoculars out. And I thought it was flippers, but it wasn't. No, it was a man. And I thought of launching the dinghy, going and picking him up. But then I thought, well, no, I had no idea. We didn't know what the situation was. There was nobody else there. Well, if I went there, he could tip me up or whatever. So, and then he started swimming towards us. And when he got to us, he had a yellow mattress with him, and we welcomed him aboard, of course, ladder down, get him aboard. And we're speaking in tricky Spanish,
again, yes.
Trying to work out what happened. And he was pretty desperate. What had happened was he was in a panga with his father, and we deduced all this later, his father and two friends with a really big, powerful outboard, and the outboard was gold to the traffickers, because a lot of drug trafficking going in that area at that time. Traffickers wanted the engine. They came, so they attacked them, give us the engine. The old man resisted. They shot him. And the other guy with him, the boy, hopped over the side. The boy who came to us, he was about 22. And the boat sank. They sank the boat, took the engine, sank the boat, left, and they didn't know the boy, or didn't know where he was. Right. So that was the situation. So he's pretty desperate. He was desperate to get back, to contact his mum, which we couldn't do. We had a VHF, but the Coast Guard wasn't responding. So it's quite a long story. A lot of the detail of it you'll get from the book. But it put us in a situation sailing through the island without the engine again.
Nobody wanted to take
Nobody
him.
wanted to take him.
And well, finally we found it was somebody took him finally, and we continued sailing afterwards.
Yeah, he was a lovely guy. He was for swimming 5 miles to the shore. He knew that we could get into big trouble. With me, I could get in big trouble because I had an alien aboard with no papers and etc. etc. You can imagine with the authorities that would not have been well looked on. So we were lucky he got a lift ashore, and we then had drifted through the islands. The wind came up, and eventually we had another, this is about day 3, had another go at the engine. Last attempt, let's have a go.
Yeah, because John was under pressure there, you know. Because I really wanted to get to the Caribbean, to the Grenadines, and I said to him, if I can't even see my friends for Christmas in the Grenadines, I'm off.
Pressure.
And it was a sort of quick start WD-40 job. And to the question before, that was the only time ever we ran the engine non-stop for 36 hours in flat water.
Yeah, to stop it.
And we didn't dare stopping it. And I often think, I mean, if there is it was flat calm, we picked this man up who would have died had we not been there. And it's really never that calm. Usually it's a horrible trip for people who want to motor. It's terrible. And we had just like a lake all the way there. So we picked him up, and then we were able to get to where we wanted to.
Were you ever concerned for your own safety?
Well, I was concerned, you know, we had picked him up, and then all of a sudden we saw more black things in the water. And we thought, oh dear, are there more people there? And then I thought, well, that's really quite scary. What do you do? How many do you pick up? And just off Venezuela, what's really happening? And but on the other hand, you just pick them up anyway, and you hope it's all going to be okay. And I don't think we were concerned for our safety, really. We were a bit worried.
Mm-hmm. Not then, but I when I was single-handed, because I did quite several thousand miles by myself. And I went into some anchorages where I was not a happy boy. Went in, but I was there, and that's where I decided to go for the night. So I then the only thing to do then was to just get ashore and try and at least speak to some of the locals, some of the fishermen, kind of bond sailors and all that. And that worked quite well. And I was accosted a couple of times in the middle of the ocean, if you like, by boats, and they were obviously wanting to see inside, see what I had. But as the boat looked a bit ethnic and a bit rough, and I didn't look like I had a lot of valuables on board, they would really try and see if I had, and ask leading questions like, could you give us a cup of water? And I knew damn well that's not what they wanted. They wanted to get aboard and have a look and see what I got. So, you know, I would explain then, well, you know, I only had 150 litres, and that had to take me all the way across. So there were moments when you worried, and ashore we worried, sometimes in Brazil, sometimes in Panama as well. You had to keep your hands on your wallet. But overall, no. I mean, no. It's a great world.
And how did you adjust to coming home to Plymouth?
We adjusted slowly. We did a lot of traveling around. I went back, actually, in previous times, I spent a long time working in Brittany. So we went back to Brittany, and we spent a couple of summers hunting around for somewhere to maybe set up home, and decided not to in the end. So it was a slow adjustment. And the real hard adjustment has been in the last 12 months when you have to stop traveling, because I traveled all my life, never stopped traveling, and to suddenly not be a traveler, that's the most difficult thing to adjust to. But I'm quite happy with it now. I've found other things to do, like writing and